Book Summary. So You Want to Talk About Race by Iljeoma Oluo. Key Insights. So You Want to Talk About Race author Iljeoma Oluo explores systemic racism and white supremacy through a unique lens. The well-meaning white person who is not fully aware of the ways their privilege creates life advantages. Oluo argues that white supremacy is so integrated into the fabric of our society that we are unable to view it objectively, and it has become our norm. Applying strong and detailed prose, Oluo takes readers on a critical journey through the impacts of implicit bias, ultimately voicing a community call to action that is long overdue. On privilege. If you ask the average white person in Middle America whether or not they are racist, you are likely to receive a confident no. However, So You Want to Talk About Race asks us to go beyond this simple answer. We are invited to dig past the stereotype that racists are only right-wing extremists and those who make overtly prejudiced comments. Instead, we must thoroughly re-examine the lens through which we view the world. While it is easy to say that you're not in favor of discrimination, you may still, perhaps inadvertently, play a role in a society that is inherently privilege-based. If you are born white, or even if you pass as white, you join the world with several scales already tipped in your favor from the start. For instance, when you learn about history in school, you learn about white history by default. When you go to the store, the products are specifically designed with people like you in mind. When you get hurt, you do not have to worry that you will be denied medical or legal support based on who you are. These are just a few of the many privileges white individuals experience that people of color, BIPOC, simply do not receive. While we like to think that nobody is born racist or starts out that way early in life, evidence suggests that children actually develop skin color preferences early on. In 2010, a CNN study found that when given the choice between a black doll and a white one, the majority of children will choose the white doll. This finding speaks to the fact that while you may not be directly telling your children to make choices based on race, they are already being impacted by the white supremacist society around them. Personal responsibility. We often hear people make well-meaning comments like, "I have black friends," when they're trying to show acceptance and perhaps even embracing of the black community. The larger implication, though, is that in making this sort of remark, you're labeling yourself as one of the good ones, and therefore you feel you do not need to actively combat racism. In doing this, you are exhibiting white exceptionalism, or the idea that you are the exception to the problem. So you are not personally responsible for addressing it, on an individual or societal level. The challenge is this. White people often feel they are doing such a good job of not being racist that they end up getting very defensive about the topic. They start painting themselves as victims. In reality, if you are white, you have no idea what it is like to be subject to police brutality or so many other injustices based entirely on race. And for this reason, you have a responsibility to your community to act out against this oppression. Staying in your own lane and remaining silent while you let others do the work is ineffective in dismantling white supremacist systems. There's no place for apathy in the fight for justice, and it is critical that we all take an active role if we want to see radical change. Harmful stereotypes. So, how do we end up in such a challenging spot? The answer lies in stereotypes. For decades, people of color have been subject to dangerous and ill-informed attitudes and generalizations that have come to define BIPOC culture. For instance, tennis superstar Serena Williams was formally and publicly reprimanded in 2018 when she called an umpire a thief. While Serena's comment may not have been appropriate, why is it that she was so forcefully called out when tennis player John McEnroe said many things that were much worse and never faced any recourse? This is an example of tone policing. BIPOC are often called out for sounding angry. Conversely, when a BIPOC speaks softly and gently, white people are sometimes surprised because this does not match their expectation. While this stereotype is a common one, there are also several others, including the idea that BIPOCs are uneducated, drug dealers, exotic, and/or more likely to steal. Even if you personally do not believe these damaging stereotypes to be true, you can only combat white supremacy by first acknowledging their existence rather than turning a blind eye. Consider cultural appropriation. This term refers to an uneven balance in which a powerful culture takes from a less powerful one. For instance, white people have adopted rap and BIPOC fashion ideas and made them part of mainstream culture when they are deeply rooted within the Black community. White culture is the dominant one, and it continues to take and take. The need for affirmative action. As a society, we have a daunting task ahead of us. Clear hurdles that are a daily reality for some and completely unimaginable for others. So, how do we achieve this end? We implement strategies to address the racial inequalities we see. One such system is an affirmative action, which aims to increase recruitment efforts among colleges in particular regard to African American men and women. While the affirmative action system was initially introduced in the 1960s, it has evolved in the decades since, sometimes being deemed unnecessary by the conservative administration. Still, with startling realities among us, like the fact that Black women only receive 65 cents for every dollar a white man earns, affirmative action is our best hope at managing a system that is historically fraught with inequality. Moreover, Black children are much more likely to attend underfunded schools than their white peers are, which means that by the time they are even preparing for college, they are already at a significant disadvantage because they have not had the access to all of the helpful pre-college tools. If 10% of the local community is Black, the same ratio should be reflected in the workforce and the education system in the area. We know all too well that this has never been the case. Affirmative action aims to compensate for this issue. School to prison pipeline. While our communities are certainly guilty of failing our Black adults, we deserve even more blame for not stepping up on behalf of our Black children. From the time that BIPOC children begin school, they are often already victims of carefully veiled, or sometimes completely overt, racism in the classroom. Educators need to be mindful that BIPOC students might not have the same economic or culture background as their white peers. For instance, the author recalls a scenario in her brother's elementary school education where students were asked to pay rent on their desks as part of a classroom behavior reward system gone awry. Unbeknownst to the teacher, Oluo's brother, Ahem, had experienced bouts of homelessness but was still regularly told that he could not afford to have bursts of energy. This comparison could have been highly triggering for him. And these sorts of situations in schools are not the exception. Studies show that racial bias among administrators and related disciplinary tactics is a leading cause of the school-to-prison pipeline. Challenge white-centric education. Talk to your school board about the opportunity gap found in graduation rates, grades, and test scores. Ask about the expulsion rates of Black and Latinx students as compared to others. We deserve to know the facts, because it is only by arming ourselves with the knowledge that we can work to foster change. The model minority and tone policing. When it comes to educating our youth about the ways in which they can fight against racial injustice, a unique dichotomy emerges. We teach both the Martin Luther King Jr. approach and the Malcolm X method. We instruct our children that the Martin Luther King Jr. approach is by far the more favorable one because it is nonviolent, and we are quick to dismiss Malcolm X's by any means necessary strategy. In drawing this line, we are writing off Malcolm X as mean and cruel, rather than recognizing that disregarding people who we feel are angry is a silencing tactic. The reality of fighting injustice is more nuanced than simply dividing people into one camp or another. This is an example of tone policing. In order to avoid tone policing in our conversations about race, be sure that when you discuss related topics, you're considering that a BIPOC is engaging from a different, more vulnerable position than you are. A common silencing tactic is referred to as the model minority myth. Essentially, this is a fetishization of Asian Americans that presumes they are top-notch academically, politically meek and soft-spoken, and financially successful. This is a dangerous stereotype as it erases the variation among Asian Americans and can have a negative impact on an Asian American who has internalized and placed significant value on this misguided belief. The main takeaway: when white individuals engage in race-related conversations with people of color, they are not simply doing a favor for their discussion partners. They are fulfilling a moral obligation to fight against the persistence of systemic oppression. While there are many avenues that a person can take in combating injustice, Oluo recommends focusing on the ways in which white people can recontextualize their own experiences and develop a deeper understanding of what it truly means to be Black in America. And she does not gloss over the uncomfortable parts of the process.
Hi, I'm Rhonda, and this is an exclusive audiobook video recorded for the Audiobook Master Channel. Enjoy your audiobook and have fun learning. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification button so you'll get updated on our next upload. If you liked the video, give us a thumbs up and say your thoughts about the book we just covered. Do you want to listen to a summary or review of a book that we haven't covered in the past? Say it in the comments below or send us a message. Don't forget to check our other uploads. Enjoy listening!